Aaron is the managing director of the University Research Park, established in 1984. It is a UW-Madison affiliate and an internationally recognized research and technology park that supports early-stage and growth-oriented businesses in a range of sectors that include engineering, computational, and life sciences. Aaron previously served as Director of Economic Development for the city of Madison, and prior to that, he spearheaded Wisconsin's economic development efforts as the Secretary of Commerce under Governor Doyle. Prior to joining the Doyle administration, he was management consultant at McKinsey & Company in Chicago, where his practice focused on business development and growth strategies. He earned an undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a graduate degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He serves on the boards of the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, the Wisconsin Technology Council, and the Weissman Biomanufacturing Advisory Board, and we're pleased to have you here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today, and to all of you for coming out on such a cold day. I was thinking, if you had only lived 48 years ago, you not only could have avoided the cold, but you could have heard Johnny Cash instead. I want to talk to you about the strategy that's underpinning the direction that University Research Park is going in. But to do that, let me just tell you quickly what University Research Park is. As Ellsworth mentioned, we're a 501c3 that's affiliated with the University of Wisconsin, and we essentially have three purposes. One is to support the University of Wisconsin in any way we can, particularly through real estate. And the other two are really to help commercialize technology that's coming out of the university, but also to contribute to the technology ecosystem in Madison so that the university's technology transfer efforts can be more fruitful. We were originally a research farm owned by the university. If you don't know where the current campus is, we have about 255 acres on Mineral Point Road and Whitney Way. And today it's been largely built out. The original idea was that the research park would ground lease to big companies that wanted to come to Madison and work closely with the university. And much like Research Triangle Park attracted IBM and Stanford's Research Park attracted HP, the idea was that perhaps that could happen here in Madison as well. And that largely didn't work. Instead, what worked was starting to build on a speculative basis small spaces that were really designed to help entrepreneurs. So Research Park partnered with a developer with the assistance of MG&E to build some real estate on spec, and over time we've somewhat accidentally become a real estate developer, we're somewhat unique in the nation of research parks in that way. But we're also very sensitive to the private sector. We're trying to avoid competing where we can. So we have an open source model. We invite companies to establish their headquarters in Research Park and other developers to come and work with us as well. So today, this park is built out. It's got 1.8 million square feet. We manage about 700,000 of it. There's about 37 buildings, and we have half. And you can see that it's built on sort of a very classic suburban office park model. And when I was thinking about how to tell you about the future developments of Research Park, I didn't really want to bore you with a lot of the tactical things that we think about day to day, rentable versus gross square feet and cap rates and net operating income, and that would be a good way to put you to sleep after that delicious lasagna and brownie. So I thought I would zoom out a little bit and tell you about the single idea that more than anything else I think is driving our strategy into the future. And let me start by kind of framing it as a preference for urban, although I'm going to suggest to you today that this preference is actually a lot more complex and that there's something much more interesting going on underneath this. So this is a well-documented trend. We see it all over the country, and we see it in Madison. You see the Epic people driving the development of apartments downtown. You see it if you're a real estate professional in the spread between cap rates of office properties in central business districts and suburban offices. You see it in articles like these, why today's startups are choosing urban lofts over suburban office parks, or some of these are hard to read, I'm sure, from back there. Millennials prefer cities to suburbs, subways to driveways. And I think a good example of that you're probably all familiar with is Exact Sciences. So the Research Park is probably the densest cluster of life science companies in the Midwest. definitely in the state. And yet, here you have one of the marquee life science companies having their first choice be to come downtown. And I totally get this. At a visceral level, this makes total sense to me. If you're competing for talent, if you're trying to grow rapidly, if you're trying to retain people, you can't really beat Madison's downtown. It's walkable, it's vibrant, it's full of food options, it's interesting, it's beautiful, it's well-planned. I have spent my entire career for the last 14 years since I've been back in Madison within 3 blocks of the Capitol. And trust me, I miss that environment every day out in the research park. But there's something interesting going on about that preference. And it's not actually so much a preference. I want to suggest to you that there's something much deeper and much more interesting going on. People will say that it's millennials and that millennials want to live downtown in these urban environments, and that might be a trend, that might be a fad. They might stay, they might age and move. I don't think it has anything to do with millennials at all. Instead, what I think is going on is that there's a new geography of industry that is starting to transform our economies, our cities, and it's a trend and a force that Research Park has to capture going into the future. And a good way to see this is to look at what I would call the Minnesota conundrum. Minnesota's GDP is 16% higher than Wisconsin's, even though we're fairly similar in terms of states. And similarly, their personal income is 11% higher. And I think that everyone has probably heard this conundrum before, but I'm not sure that it has been, I've heard very few explanations of it that have satisfied me. When you look at job growth since the recovery coming out of the Great Recession happened, they've grown 2% greater jobs overall, and on an annual basis, on a compound annual rate, their compound annual rate is 33% higher than ours. Now, some people want to make this about politics. Some people argue that there's some sort of policy difference, that Minnesota's governor is pursuing a different policy than our governor. But in fact, when you zoom out and look at it, this trend has been going on for quite a long time. So to make this sort of transparent, I sliced a chunk here for you from 1963 to 1997, although the trend keeps going. The definition of gross domestic product changed in 97, but if you carried this out with the new data set, the trend continues. What you see here is that in the early 1960s, Wisconsin's GDP per capita was actually greater than Minnesota's. But sometime in the mid-70s, a split started, and that split's continued every year since, more or less. You see the same thing when you look at personal income. Now we're going back to the 1930s, basically. And back then, Wisconsin's personal income was actually higher than Minnesota's. And for most of the 40s, 50s, 60s, the two states basically tracked. But again, in the mid-70s, you see a split develop, and that split's continued, and it shows no signs of abating. Similarly, Wisconsin's always been a larger state than Minnesota, and this is showing you the gap. This is the difference between Minnesota's population and Wisconsin's population. So in the 30s, Wisconsin started gaining population on Minnesota. We were a faster growing state all the way up until, about the mid-70s when that changed, and Minnesota's been growing faster ever since. And that's important because economic growth is really critically tied to the youth of your workforce. So you see, for example, Japan's economy being very sluggish, in part because their workforce is too old. You see China revisiting their one-child policy, in part because they're worrying about this problem. I think a lot of business leaders care about immigration reform for a wise reason, which is they're thinking about how they get the youthful workforce of the future that they need. And so Minnesota has started to grow faster than us as well, which is a troubling sign. Now, the structure of the economies is pretty similar. I've highlighted the cells where we actually have a difference. But if you look at sectors, we're almost identical except in sort of 2 areas. We're a little bit more manufacturing intensive than they are. And, this slid a little bit. But professional business services and education and health services is a little heavier in Minnesota. And so some people suggest that the makeup of the economies is to blame. And that's partially true. But I actually think that's a symptom of the problem. It's not the driver of the problem. Instead, what I think is going on here is that industry is developing a new relationship with geography. So if you think about kind of the way America developed, we used to be a largely agricultural or rural economy, and agriculture inherently is spread out because you need a lot of land. There's clusters where you have mills or cities, but for the most part, you just sprawl, right? And then we moved into sort of a natural resource economy, and natural resource economies have to go where the natural resources are. So you need to go where the forests are, or where the mining is, or where you have rivers to move the logs, or where you have waterways that you can take advantage of. And as we transitioned into an industrial economy, you still had some of that. You had manufacturing concentrated in cities where it could be near rail lines or harbors or where it could access workforce. But with the rural electrification that happened coming out of the New Deal, and you started to have electric infrastructure everywhere in the country, and then Eisenhower investing in the interstate highway system, you started to have transportation infrastructure everywhere in the country. Manufacturing started to sprawl, and today it looks like this. It's auto-oriented, it's one story, surrounded by parking, and it's highly, highly suburban. Which brings us to today. If you look at Dane County and you ask what's driving our economy, there's only 3 sectors that are both large and growing, and they are biopharmaceuticals, software and IT, and a category called education and knowledge creation, which actually includes a lot of research organizations such as Exact Sciences. And this new innovation economy clusters totally differently than all the industries that preceded it. It has a huge preference for cities and for density and for clustering, and for a very good reason that I'll show you. So I picked Apple Computer because Apple Computer was founded as the emblem for this economy, because Apple Computer was founded in 1976. And I think it is no accident that the split between Minnesota and Wisconsin happened at about the time that computers and biotechnology were transforming this innovation sector. So look at this. This is the percentage of population that is clustered in the metro area in Wisconsin and in Minnesota. 64% of Minnesota's population is in the Twin Cities area. We have 27% of our population in the metro Milwaukee area and only 11% in the Madison area. And this matters in a really important way because it turns out there's scaling effects to cities. So some things scale in a total linear fashion. If you double the size of a city, you have to double the number of housing units. That makes sense. You don't triple the number of housing units because a third of them would be vacant. The infrastructure scales with diminishing marginal cost. So if you double the size of the city, you don't have to double the miles of road, you don't have to double the miles of fiber, you don't have to double the number of gas stations. You can use your infrastructure more intensively. So cities, as they scale, start to get an advantage in this infrastructure category. But the thing that is most interesting to me is that you actually get an increasing return to scale on economic outputs and innovation outputs. So when you double the size of a city, you more than double its innovation capacity. So let's take a look at a couple of these. If scale didn't matter, this is quartiles of cities from smallest to largest, if you can't see that in the back. And if scale didn't matter, this is what it would look like. Every city's innovation capacity per person would be exactly the same. But that's not in fact what the data looks like. It looks like this. The cities that are in the largest quartile are more than twice as innovative per person, per capita, than the smallest cities. So similarly, if you look at the number of math and computer occupations per 1,000 residents, you see the exact same trend. There's more than twice as many computer science occupations in the largest quartile than in the smallest quartile. And so there's something interesting going on here, right? It's not just that software engineers go out to Silicon Valley because there's jobs there and because they like it there. It's also that when they get there, there's something about the environment that actually makes them more productive. And you see this increasing return to scale. And I think when you start thinking about that, it's sort of easy to imagine why that might happen. If you have a Epic Systems engineer in Madison and they're at a cocktail party on Friday night, they're probably talking to somebody from state government or American Family Insurance or the university. If you have somebody at a cocktail party in Palo Alto, they're probably talking to somebody from Facebook or Google or LinkedIn or Twitter or one of the other. They have a much greater chance of running into and networking with and creating spillovers with their peers. And so in order to win this game, what you need to do is you need to find strategies for punching above your weight class. So, of course, the University of Wisconsin-Madison is probably Wisconsin's single greatest asset in punching above our weight class. When you look at the amount of research that's being done here, over $1 billion a year, it's more than all but 3 other universities in the country. And it's more than Harvard. It's more than MIT. It's more than Stanford. It's more than Minnesota. It's more than just about everybody. And to see the effect of that, here's what it would look like. This is population on the x-axis and then innovation, the number of patents on the y-axis. And if you take out, now I'm not even taking out all the patents, I'm just taking out WRF's patent portfolio here. So if you just take out WRF from the picture and pretend that that didn't exist, Madison would fall just about on the regression line there, and you can see how the regression line slopes up, that as you get bigger, you also get more patents. We'd look like Toledo or Boise or Albany, New York. But instead, we jump way above the regression line just when you throw WRF's patents back in, not even all the other university-related patents. And we start to look like Research Triangle Park, the suburbs of Boston, the suburbs of New York. And I think that this effect happens at every level of scale. You see it at the city effect really clearly. The Santa Fe Institute is studying this and doing some really interesting work. But you also see it in industries, and the effects of clusters are well understood on the way they reinforce and create greater growth. You see it at neighborhood levels where companies create spillovers by being located near each other. And I think you see it within buildings. If you design buildings well to foster communication, employees become more productive. And so this is the idea that I am trying to use to drive the future of Research Park. The idea that if you take a lot of people, what you want to do is compact them into the smallest area and create channels for them to interact with each other to create these spillovers so that you can punch above your weight class. So this is the idea. The idea of Research Park going into the future is that we need to create these innovation neighborhoods, that we have to be creating places that are both physically designed to foster innovation, that are being mindful of these trends, that are appealing to technology companies today, but that are also creating these channels so that we can capture these increasing returns to scale that I think happen at every level of scale. And so when you think about what makes a neighborhood, you think about having neighbors. There's got to be people around you. There's got to be an attractive built environment. You have to kind of like the way the architecture is. There's got to be some amenities in the neighborhood. You know, maybe it's a coffee shop down the street. There's got to be some public spaces, you know, the way the sidewalks work, the way the park systems work, the way the neighborhood kind of interacts with each other. And hopefully there's got to be some activities and some interaction, something that brings a sense of community. So I think that there is an analogy to this in the technology sector, that we have to take a critical mass of technology firms and gather them into one space. We have to provide them with affordable, quality, attractive spaces that they appeal to them. We have to create value-added infrastructure, and whether that's, you know, sharing autoclaves or conference facilities, we have to add amenities that make that a better neighborhood. We have to create these third places that encourage collisions, and that might be coffee shops, restaurants, running trails, whatever. And then we have to activate that community with events and with programming. And of course, then we have to make it visible to the rest of the world. So thank you for inviting me here to help do that. To give you a sense of this, you know, downtown Madison is going to be critically important in this. Brad Binkowski was here a few weeks ago, and he talked about how technology was growing as a percentage of his portfolio. And I think that Madison's downtown will continue to thrive and become a hub for much of the technology growth that we're going to see. But of course, it's landlocked. It's part of what makes it charming is that we're on an isthmus between two lakes, but that means there's limited areas to actually develop and fully serve the technology sector downtown. So we're going to need other places where technology can thrive and where we can have a different offering. And Research Park, both at our current campus and at our second campus, we have 200 acres on the far west side of Madison, is surely going to be part of that equation. And you know, my ambition is to lead that equation. So this is just a count of companies, and this is showing you where tech is today in Dane County. So if you look at, 450 or so technology firms in the Madison area, you can see that the dominant place where they are is in that red bucket, followed probably by the far west bucket in pink. Fitchburg and South Madison's in green, the east side of Madison's in yellow, downtown and campus areas in blue, and then the rural or outer line parts of the county are in brown. So University Research Park in the red there and University Research Park 2 in the pink is already where most of the technology firms are located, and I don't see any sign that that's going to not continue. When you look at life sciences, the trend is even more stark. You have a huge share in the red bucket and in the pink bucket. I'm out of time, so I'll finish up here. But even when you look at health IT firms, more than half of them are actually outside of the downtown. So many of these firms will start downtown. Some of them will stay downtown. Some of them will start in places like Starting Block, or they'll help push the development of the East Washington corridor. But they're also going to continue to grow, particularly on the west side of Madison, where most of the professional workforce lives. And that's going to be hugely important to us. So we're clustering them, gathering them up, and this chart's showing you the number of technology firms per square mile. Kendall Square in Boston is often considered the densest square mile of technology in the country, but Research Park is almost at that level of density, believe it or not, even with our current design. And we're exceeding all these other places, which, to be fair, are more like cities and are a little bit bigger than just our little modest research park. Exact Sciences is a great example of this. They currently lease the building on the north that you see there, and they own the building on the south. So we're working with them to essentially double the size of their footprint on this. That will start to add density, more people compacted into the same area. We're doing things like investing in infrastructure. So Food Carts is a program we started a few years ago that we continue to grow, putting in picnic infrastructure and promoting the food carts to start to create these places where people can spill over. We want to work with the private sector to bring other amenities like coffee shops into the research park to foster this. And of course, we're investing in events, social events, professional events, and we want to do more of this so that people can come together, meet their peers, network, and drive some of these innovation effects. So when I look at the agenda for Research Park, here's what's on it. We're the picture that I started with is at 1403. It's a building that Wharf helped us purchase a number of years ago next to the Institute for Discovery. Used to be Luther's Blues. We're repositioning that as a campus-oriented entrepreneurial hub. That's our newest building, our newest project. We're adding density through development of large tenants. Exact Science is one of them, but there's several others in the pipeline. We're expanding our food cart program. We're attracting other amenities and hopefully going to market at URP2 with other amenities from the start. We're investing in programming and events to create these innovation channels. We're trying to figure out more and more ways to make the green space usable. It's been shown by research to be tremendously beneficial to employee well-being and wellness. We're developing a conceptual master plan for URP2 so that we can incorporate these trends right from the start. And then we're working to attract partners for some of the areas that are outside the scope of Research Park's university and technology-focused mission. So it's a big agenda, but it's driven by this singular idea that if we compress people, smart people, and Madison has a lot of them, into tight spaces and help them foster interaction, we will unleash innovation at increasing returns to scale. And in that way, we can help, Research Park can help maximize what the University of Wisconsin has to offer, but we can also then help, by maximizing Madison, help Wisconsin punch above its weight class. Thank you very much. Oh, no, don't give Susan Schmitz the microphone. Is it? You always have the tough questions. That's. You know, I don't know that it's going to totally urbanize from the center out. I think it's going to urbanize around nodes. So I think what you're going to see is you're certainly going to see continued development in the Cap East district, I hope, and you'll probably see that start to spread up kind of the arterials, you know, down Park Street, maybe up Sherman, out East Washington. But I think there's other pockets where there's enough density or there's enough infill going on that you're going to see it happen in other places. So the Hill Farms development near Hilldale, I think, is very exciting, and the potential to reuse that DOT site. You know, I think the two research park campuses are really natural places for this to happen, both because of the nature of who we are and what we're doing, but also because I think there's pent-up demand for these vibrant suburban environments that we're trying to create. So I think you're going to see these nodes, and I think the biggest challenge that we're going to have with that, which is probably not a surprise to anyone, is transit and how we move people through the isthmus and between these various poles. It's especially stark. We did a survey when I started of our workforce, and 70% of our workforce at Research Park lives in a crescent from Wanakee through Middleton, West Madison, Verona, and Fitchburg, 70% of the workforce. And I think if you looked at a lot of employers, you'd find that the college-educated and professional workforce primarily lives to the western part of Dane County, which may or may not be where they work. And so transit's going to be key. Hi, Bob.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. It's great. When do you think that Research Park 2 will start?
I mean, so Research Park 2 is in a sense ready to go. I mean, it could start any time, but I think that before we put a shovel in the ground, it's probably important to get the strategy right. And if you look at it today, there's an area of mixed use that's planned. There's sort of this couplet that's planned that I've become skeptical is going to happen anytime soon, if at all, for a variety of reasons. It's two one-way streets that retail is allergic to one-way streets. You can kind of see that in the difference between Willie Street and the Johnson-Gorham pair. It's got a transmission line running through it. It's split over two different property owners. And there's a real question about, are you trying to move cars efficiently through there, or are you trying to slow it down and make it walkable? And, you know, the city will have to resolve that tension. So I think that the danger in Research Park 2 is actually starting too fast before we have a good plan for how we can make the environment vibrant right from the start. So, and we have actually so much work at Research Park 1 to do that I don't think we need to go there quite yet. And the longer we wait, the better it's going to be.
As a new Rotarian and Blue Harness Society member, I was interested in your cocktail party metaphor. I was surprised that you think, or sort of like, builds on like. So we had exponential effects from software developers with software developers. I guess I'd like to think, that interaction between different industries would be more beneficial to a city. It sounds like that's not the case. We want to segment them, and if that's true, I'm an American family at that cocktail party, I'm going to be a bit worried. How would I tap in to our new development and our new tech?
Yeah, I didn't mean to take the analogy too far. I don't think it's just software engineers talking to software engineers. It's actually really useful for a software engineer to talk to an insurance guy and ask, well, what problem is going on in the insurance industry? And there might be a marriage that's made that way too. And surely that's important. It's just that, if the software guy and the insurance guy come together and they start talking about the Packers instead of what they do, that you don't get that effect. And so if you have somebody from Twitter and LinkedIn and Google all sitting there talking about industry, you're more likely to have professional conversations. Hi, Roberta.
Terrific job, and so proud of you since I knew you when you were like in your 20s, maybe first.
I've got a lot more gray in my temples now.
Just terrific data, and the data you had specifically showing how we compare to other parts of the country, given our percent of patents per capita and the power of the UW in taking us to that level. How are you feeling about, since we've come through a time of some of our policymakers at the state level and in the legislature not understanding the power of the university and what it does for our state and economy? How do you feel about how we're doing in delivering that message and what else has to happen so we keep this engine as strong as it has to be?
So here's the thought experiment I do sometimes. You know, if you were dropped into a place where you didn't speak the language, let's say Tibet, and, you know, your translator was going to leave the room in 30 seconds, but before the translator left, the host asked you, where is this Wisconsin place and why should I care about it? You have one thing to say about what makes Wisconsin distinctive. What would you say? And when you do that thought experiment, you know, there's lots of things that jump to people's mind. People say, oh, Wisconsin's beautiful. Sure, but compared to Colorado or Hawaii, is that really what we're going to hang our hat on? You know, Wisconsin's got a lot of manufacturing. Sure, but, you know, so does Indiana and Pennsylvania and Michigan. A lot of people will admittedly tout the Green Bay Packers, and it's hard to fault them for that. But when you think about what Wisconsin has in spades that any other state would be envious of, it's the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's the most incredible thing that a fairly average-sized state with a fairly, you know, average level of income has historically invested in this research institution that is one of the top in the world and is producing more research expenditures than all but 3 other universities in the country. It's incredible. It's an incredible asset. And it reaches everywhere in a lot of ways. So, you know, when you think about companies like Exact Sciences or, you know, Stratotech, which came directly out of the university, developing these diagnostic tests or therapeutics, you know, if you're in Rhinelander, you're not immune from colon cancer or being burned, and it's university research that's going to advance your health. We did a survey last year where we looked at a sample of badgers and asked them if they had started companies, and we found that there were University of Wisconsin-Madison graduates who had started companies. Just in our sample, we found 51 of the 72 counties had UW-Madison graduate startups in them. Of all different kinds. And that's really important because startups and the expansion of, you know, young companies account for almost all of the net job creation. There was a great study that just came out from UW Extension that sort of showed the impact of new businesses and scaling businesses on economic growth. And so it's not just, you know, the direct employment of professors, it's not just the research, but it's also, you know, the social benefits, the well-being benefits that are being spread out from the university, and it's the alumni that are being trained and then going back to their communities to start companies that is going to matter all across Wisconsin. So I think it's hugely important for everyone to support the university and fight for funding and investment in a historic and very special asset.
Hey, Aaron, thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. A couple thoughts. You talked about the far west side and that it's not quite ready, your new research park, and that's understandable. I'm thinking about an opportunity where you talk about transportation and an urban setting and the dynamics of neighborhood, and I look at Oscar Mayer's site. And so is there ever any thought where the university might talk to the city, who might talk to the county, and maybe even the state, and say, we should make a statement here. It has a lot of the tools that you need to be successful sooner than maybe the Fire Research Park. Plus, if you look at the neighborhood advancement on the east side, Willie Street, et cetera, it's turning over, and it's becoming a very dynamic place where I think a lot of the next generation of workforce will want to be. So could you comment on that?
You know, there's probably people that are better able to comment on that than I can. I can say that I think there has to be sort of a strategy decision that's made on the Oscar Mayer site about what it's going to be. And that sort of involves, first of all, are you going to ask Oscar Mayer to demolish the building? So when I was at the Department of Commerce, we had some success having companies demolish and remediate sites so that they could be redeveloped as a blank slate. Or are you going to try to preserve it as a manufacturing facility? And so you have that split. And then within that split, if it's going to be manufacturing, you know, what else are you going to do with it? What are you going to do around it? Who's going to populate it? Is it more than one manufacturer? Is it a cluster of smaller manufacturers, or, you know, what is it? And if it's a blank slate, you know, does it want to be employment, or does it want to be, you know, something else? Does it want to be housing or mixed use? So I think it's a really interesting opportunity, and it's a huge tract of land that's relatively central. It's sort of a logical project for the city to take on after East Washington, after the Cap East District. It's sort of the logical extension of that effort, which I got to work on when I was at the city. And so I'd be interested in being part of that conversation, but I don't know if Research Park's the answer or not. And I guess the other thing is that I would worry a little bit about is part of the strategy has to be to compact people into the same area, not spread them out. So I think you have to be a little sensitive to that too. Thank you very much.
Spectacular. Presentation.
Yeah, thank you.